Today I'm going to walk you through an edit of a kitchen that I shot. Little backstory, I was hired by a designer to come photograph 3 images of a kitchen, and when I got there, we hit it off really well. It was first time meeting. We did the kitchen, but then we did a whole bunch of other photos. So I'm not going to edit the entire shoot, but I think this first shot has enough challenges of its own that I will be able to show you the majority of the things that I do during an edit. Now, first things first, this was, like I said, I haven't even looked through this entire set yet. As you can see, the previews aren't even loaded. But I'm just now starting on these ones. This is the first shot that I set up. I shot this with a 45 millimeter tilt shift lens, the Canon tilt shift, and I shot this on my Sony A7R4. I'm using the Metabones 4 adapter, and yeah, it works out well for me. And yeah, as you can see, I shot this twice. The first time I had this little frame over here, this picture, and I didn't like that, so I removed it. And in hindsight, looking at this, I probably would have decluttered this kitchen a little bit more. Some of the other things I notice about this that I don't like is there's a towel sitting here, and it was meant to be decorative, but it's just kind of distracting, so I wish I would have removed that. I probably could have spent a little bit more time adjusting this plant or even removing it because it doesn't really do a lot for the photo. It's just kind of distracting, and it kind of matches with what's back there. So it's a weird thing, and it's kind of out of place, and it doesn't really need to be there. It's just filling up space that doesn't need to be filled in. So I probably would have taken that out. I probably would have spread this out a little bit more, but I was using this plant to block a wall plate right there. And I should have moved this over a little bit to the left to block that wall plate completely. And I probably could have just done a little bit more tidying up. I did remove a lot from the counters. It was overly staged. I did straighten up the stools. I could have pulled this in a little bit more, but I'm okay with where it's at. It just looks weird that it's cut off halfway at the stove. So not a huge deal, but it probably would have looked better had I just brought the thing all the way over here maybe. Who knows? I spent some time straightening this thing out. I have it where I like it, so I don't care what your opinion is. That's where I decided I wanted it. And the other thing is this is going to be an absolute nightmare. The designer also happens to be a realtor, so not only did she design this home, her husband built it, and I don't know if he built it from scratch or if he just renovated it, but this was thrown up last minute because there was a broker open. And yeah, it was not done properly. As you can see, it's just kind of a hodgepodge, and there's fingerprints all over it. And these are like stained fingerprints. Like, you need something else to clean this. I tried cleaning this off with a Norwex rag. If you're not familiar with Norwex, check them out. But I tried cleaning this up, and these smudges would not come off. So I just knew I was going to have to Photoshop it. I'll probably even have to recreate it, but I'm going to try some things first. So for the most part, that's everything that I'm noticing that's kind of bothering me up front. So I know I'm going to have to tackle those things. There are some color cast issues. I'm not a stickler with color cast, but I'm going to reduce them a bit. For the most part, I just want to create a little bit more light in this area, darken it up back here a little bit so that my eye isn't being pulled all the way back there. And that's pretty much it. So the way I generally edit is I don't even look at all the other photos first. Usually I just go in the order they were taken, and I let the main photo kind of influence what the rest of the shoot's going to look like. So I've got 3 different exposures. That's all the information I need. I don't need 5 exposures because I'm not going to be pulling, all this. I'm not doing real estate. I'm not pulling in the detail of these windows all together. But what I want to be able to do is just make subtle highlight and shadow adjustments on these layers. I don't want to mess with the whites and blacks too much. I just want to do as least editing as possible on these to get the detail that I want so that I can hand blend all these in Photoshop after the fact. So we're going to go ahead and bring these into Photoshop as is with my minor adjustments made, and we're going to get started. So the first things first is I move my base layer down to the bottom, and this is going to be the exposure that I'm working off of. Now, personally, I like things to look a little bit, I like shadows a lot. There's not a ton of natural light happening in this kitchen, but I love how dark it is in here. The one problem I'm running into is it's very dark over here. So what tends to happen is our eyes get pulled to the darkest spot, the brightest point in the room, and it's leading back here. So what I plan on doing with this photo is I want to darken this area up a little bit. Make sure it's not as bright, and brighten this area up a little bit. That way I can get some balance. And eventually what should happen is this refrigerator area should not necessarily be the brightest point in the room, but you won't be pulled all the way back here. You'll be pulled through the kitchen around this island here. So that's the idea, that's the intention. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. We will start by brightening up our darker areas, and I use Raya Pro. This is it creates masks for you, luminosity masks. There's also Lumenzia is another luminosity mask tool, but I prefer Raya Pro over that. So this is not a full Raya Pro tutorial, so you can get that another time or somewhere else. All right, so without going into too much detail, I pretty much stick in this section here, and I'll come down here and make some adjustments. But basically what you're doing is, these are kind of presets, and what happens is this is your brights, your darks, and your midtones. So right now I have my brightest, okay, this is where it gets kind of confusing. What I want to happen on this photo is I want to mask off the brightest parts of my brightest image so that the darkest parts of my brightest image show through the mask. I'll show you what I mean by that. So again, in this panel, we've got brights, darks, and mediums. Because I want the darker parts to show through of this particular layer, this image, I'm going to work in the darker column here. So there's presets here for you, and you can kind of just toggle through and see what suits best, and then you can make some micro adjustments. So we're going to start at 1. And while it may not look like it, this is actually the least dramatic preset that's on there. I'm just going to toggle through these so you can kind of see what we're doing. And remember, whatever is white will be revealed, and whatever is dark will be hidden. There's maybe a metaphor there. And we're just going to toggle through these, and as you can see, it'll start getting more and more drastic as we go along. Now, we don't want it to be super drastic. I rarely go down to 3, 4, 5, and 6. I usually go toggle between 1 and 2, and then I come down here and I make my micro adjustments. So we're going to go ahead and bring up some of those darker areas, and I'm just going to add a little bit of contrast and scoot this over. So as you can see, even when it's gray, that will still come through, but black is going to be, you're not going to reveal anything that's black. Keep going a little bit. Yeah, this is good here. Okay. So the main thing is I really want to get this cabinet area bright. So we're going to go ahead and hit select white, because this is going to make a selection of all the white parts in this image. And you're not going to see any ants, but they are there. There is a selection there. So let's go ahead and I'm going to put my brush to, I like to start around 20 or 30 because I don't want to start off too dramatic and bring too much into the frame. So I'm just going to go ahead and lightly start brushing some of these darker areas in. Again, we're at 20% right now. And I also want to remind you that, well, I haven't even told you yet, but I will add contrast later. Right now, I'm just trying to make the room somewhat evenly exposed. I don't want it to be HDR-y looking, but I do want to brighten some of these things up a little bit. And that pretty much is it, just a very minor amount. As you can see, we have evened things out quite a bit here. So maybe just a few more things here. Again, we're just trying to make things somewhat more even. Now, since we're trying to make things even, you can see back here it's very bright and the windows are very bright. We're going to use this darker layer to try and darken things up a little bit. So you're going to want to hit Command D to deselect the selection that's made that you can't see. That's the one downside. You have to remember to deselect the selection that's made that you can't see. And then you're going to come back in here, and now since we're working on the darkest layer and we want to reveal the brightest parts of the darker layer, we're going to work in our bright column. So again, we're going to start at 1 and just see what it gives us. And that's actually probably what I want. So we're going to go ahead and just mess with it a little bit. I just want it a little bit brighter. A little bit more. That should be good because I'm trying to darken this area back here. So we're going to go ahead and select white. Get rid of that. I'm going to make this brush really big, and I'm just going to slowly start brushing some of that. And you can kind of see how it's all starting to come back in, but the darker parts are not being affected. Only the brighter parts in this image. And this is not real estate photography. We're not going to do a window pull. We're just trying to retain some of the detail that's in that window. And as you can see, this is now looking all the way back to that left is no longer pulling your eye as strong towards it. Right now, your eye is still heading that direction, but what should be happening is, you should be able to move through this frame relatively simple, and this is not pulling you as strong back there. I'll probably also add a vignette toward the end, but as of right now, I have my image kind of exposed how I want. I'm just going to make some minor adjustments. I'm going to go ahead and deselect. I'm going to bring my brush all the way down to 10%, and I'm going to make some minor like dodge and burn type things. Like for instance, this plant back here should be a little darker, but I don't want the whole scene being dark. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of subtly brush in the shadows and whatnot. Yeah, that's good. This can be darker right here. There we go. So before and after, this is kind of what we're looking at. So hopefully you kind of see where we're going, and you're following along here. Now I have several problems to solve in this photo. As you can see, this hood is horrid looking, and it's going to be a beast to get rid of. So there's many things that I can do. Frequency separation is probably going to be the easiest. But as I'm looking at this, I'm almost thinking I will maybe try and start with a gradient. So we're going to go ahead and select this. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and hit our brush tool. Actually, we're going to hit our gradient tool, which is G. I'm going to hold down Option, and I'm going to select. Now you can see there's many gray tones that scale throughout this. That's a little more pinkish magenta down here, and it's a little gray up here. So we're going to select both of those. We're going to select the one that's far up here. I'm going to hit X to switch my palette right here. And I'm going to select a gray from down here. Now you can see we have both tones from there. We have our gradient selected. I'm going to go ahead and use my gradient here, and we're just going to try and, oops, wrong way, replicate what the color is doing on the stove itself. So I do need a little bit more gray up here, so I'm just going to actually brush it in this time, and I'm going to bring it up to 30%. Let's just compare it. It needs to be a little bit darker, so let's go ahead and select that. Maybe a little bit darker yet, just a subtle amount. Yeah, that looks good. And we're just going to add some grain to this. So I'm going to zoom in so we can kind of see it a little bit better. And we don't need it to be significant. I just want it to match the grain that's on the photo already. So we're just going to bump this up a little bit to where the grain kind of matches what's on the photo. And that's pretty good right there. And it looks okay. I probably should have used my brush when filling that in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this. Excuse me. I'm going to hit the gradient again. And before I do that, I'm actually going to add a little bit. I'm going to expand this by 1 pixel. And then I'm going to feather it by 2 pixels. Now we're going to try this again. That's better. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and add our noise. And that looks good. Now we're going to probably still mess with it a little bit because it looks a little too rendery right now. If I bring down the opacity to like 90, it adds a little bit of those smudges, which I'm okay with having a little bit in there. We just don't want it to look obnoxious. You can see I brought it down to 90, and that helped a bit. So there's 90, there's 100. So it just brings a little bit of that life back into it, which I'm totally fine with. Now we're going to essentially do the same exact thing with the rest of the hood, and I'm going to use the same exact layer because most of what I'm going to be doing, and this will also help me fix these lines here, most of what I'm going to be doing is within this same, so we're going to fix that there. Okay, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to expand by a pixel. We're going to feather by 2 pixels. And we have a little bit of a different color situation, so we're going to go ahead and select the colors that we need. We're going to start with this one. Whoops. And we'll do our gradient. And again, we're just comparing back and forth. And there's definitely some adjustments we'll need to make here. So let's see. We need to get a little darker right down here. And probably just over here as well. And we'll go ahead and add our noise. And there's an obvious color cast on this. We will address that later. That part looks good. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next one here. And this is also, I stopped in the middle of my thought earlier, but we're also fixing these seams that were never completed. So she'll be happy to see that's fixed. I probably should bring this all the way up to the ceiling, but I'm not a construction expert, and I'm not sure if it's supposed to technically go all the way up to the ceiling. From my understanding, the vent actually goes out here. This is more just for decoration. But it still looks kind of weird with that gap up there, so I may just crop in later so that it's not there. I don't want to mess with the construction of it. So hopefully you can kind of understand and follow along with what I'm doing here. We're just essentially recreating this scene. Oops, I forgot to add my... Okay, so this is kind of what we're dealing with so far. It looks very fake. We will address that later. But we're just trying to get as close as possible to the original colors of like what it should look like if it's clean. But yes, it does look very rendery and fake right now. So we have some work to do. Not a big deal. I probably should have... Let me just do one thing really quick that I should have done better. Two more, and I'll probably leave this side alone because it looks pretty good, but there's a lot of smudges on this. And this is going to be challenging because it's very reflective. So I think what we're going to have to do is do some cloning because I'm not going to try and recreate this. It would just take too much work and it's just not worth the effort. So let's go ahead and we're going to add our noise to this. And we're literally just going to add a mask and brush this thing away right here. Brush this edge away. It's just not worth trying to recreate all that. So, and then we can fix these smudges up later. So let's go ahead and bring this down to 90% as well. And actually it should be a little bit darker down there, so let's go ahead and get that as well. All right, so we have officially recreated our hood. We're just going to clone some of this stuff out here. We'll use our patch tool. Let's get rid of some of these smudges. Not looking for perfection, we're just looking for control. And if these things are not controllable and I can't just control these with ease, then we need to address them before we go any further. I think we're close enough, and I feel pretty good about this. Again, That is not what this is supposed to look like. It looks a little rough. So now we have to, this is where the frequency separation is going to come in. I do have an action made that, or it's not made, that I saved from Piximperfect. And we're going to go ahead and apply that right now. And this creates a frequency separation layer for me. The only thing I really need to do is just kind of adjust the amount of blur I want to add. And I think that's good. So I'm not going to show you how to set up frequency separation manually because I haven't done it in so long, to be honest with you, and I just don't remember off the top of my head. Once you have a preset made or an action made, it's pretty simple. You just have to follow along. But it's going to give you these two layers. You're going to get a high frequency layer and a low frequency layer. What these are is, it's basically, it takes your image and it separates the textures and the lines and whatnot, the surface, from the color. So this top layer, I'm going to go ahead and blur all these out so you can't see. This top layer is just the texture and the lines. It's just and I'll show you how this all applies in just a minute. And then this is just the color. So when we added that Gaussian blur, I intentionally wanted to make it as blurry as possible because what you'll see in a minute, but you don't want hard lines on this. And well, let me just show you why. It's easier to demonstrate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag my adjusted layer into here. It's within the frequency separation. But as you can see, it's a little weird because all the textures are still in the lines or whatever are still separated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually try and brush out these. I'm going to mask out some of these odd lines. So we're going to get our brush tool. And I'm just going to kind of come in here and brush out only. I'm going to try to avoid the edges as much as I can. But I want to brush out some of these weird things here. Because what's going to happen, and you can kind of see what's happening. So what I'm essentially trying to do is just brush out as much of the this odd texture stuff as I can, but it leaves a little bit of like the edges where I want. And actually I should have reduced this opacity a little bit. There we go. Bring the opacity of the color layer down to 60. There we go. So you can kind of see it's taking away a lot of the weird texture stuff, but it's keeping a lot of the grit, I guess you could say. The original. Because, you know, with the textures, the texture, having the textures in there, the textures, behind those textures there is, you know, there's a color change there as well. So having the color change, so you can see what I mean by that is like you can see all the smudges, and they're clear smudges, but it's also a darker tone. So the frequency separation separates the smudges themselves from that darker tone. So it still leaves kind of like a residue, if you will, of the darker tone, which adds a little bit of life to it. But I can go through and I can still, you know, get pretty close to the edges of this, and it leaves a little bit of life in there, so it's not completely flat. It still adds. It's like a untextured texture, if you will. So that's pretty much what we're doing now. We're just brushing out the hard texture of this, and just leaving that softer, subtle texture behind that was in the color. And I think we're done. I think that looks fine. So this is before, this is after. So again, it still leaves a little bit of that texture in there, so it still feels somewhat lived in, but it's a lot cleaner. And I can adjust. I brought the opacity all the way down to 64. If it's still a little too dirty looking, I can increase it, which will clean the image up. But I don't want to bring it up too much. I want to leave a little bit of that grit in there. Maybe we'll just keep it at like Yeah, 80%, that's fine. And I'm gonna keep this open or unflattened so that we can come back and mess with it later if we want to. Okay, now we need to look and see what other problem areas we're dealing with. Now, I'm not a huge fan of removing distractions, mainly because it's, a lot of times it's part of the design, but when it's somewhat generic, it's not that big of a deal. I don't mind removing it. There's really no use for these can lights, but I'm going to keep them in because I don't know. I didn't ask the designer if that was important to keep the can lights in there. But like there's wall switches in here, and these wall switches aren't really that important. They don't add anything to the scene, so we're going to go ahead and mess with these. I'm going to create a new flattened layer, and this will be just for the wall outlet. So we're gonna start with the patch tool. The patch tool is one of my favorite tools. If you hit Command J, it'll select that, and if you hit Shift F5 and under your contents you have content aware selected, we'll go ahead and fill that in. It didn't really work out that well for us, so I'll hit undo, and then I'm just gonna find an area that best closely matches it, and that's good enough. It's pretty close actually, so we'll keep that. We'll come over here, and I will probably clone this out, at least part of it. We'll start up here. Again, we're not looking for perfection, we're looking for control. Nobody's going to see this detail except for you and I. I would imagine the designer will even forget that there is an outlet there. Probably not, but maybe. But the outlet doesn't serve any purpose other than, if it were like a designed out, or like some kind of plate that was interesting, then we'd probably keep it. But this isn't, wall plates aren't design elements, typically. And I hid this plate with this plant, so it's not that noticeable. I'm just going to leave it. And then back here we've got this, so we'll get rid of this. It should be pretty simple. Okay. That's it as far as those kinds of distractions that I'm seeing. I can't tell if this is an issue with the ceiling or if it's a reflection, but I'm going to consider it a distraction and just remove it. I feel like it's just a reflection, but I like it better without it. And same with this here. Again, I don't think there's really rules to any of this stuff. I think it's just a matter of what you prefer. Like, those things were distracting to me, so I'm assuming they'll be distracting to others. So I'm going to remove it. We'll clean the ceiling up a little bit more. This little light right here does not serve a purpose in this photo, so we'll get rid of that. You can see the bulb right there. And I feel pretty good about this. There was a lot of decor, and I didn't have a ton of time, so I did not remove any more other than just this one photo that was over there. I probably could have gotten rid of this bowl. Yeah, a stager came through and did it, and she did a great job, but just a lot of the stuff isn't necessary when it comes to photos themselves. All right. We got some crumbs down there. This isn't really that big of a deal. I'm going to go to my healing brush tool because it's just, I can just do this quick, or spot healing. Let's remove some of these crumbs. Let's see. See if we got any smudges on here that we need to clean up. Got a little bit right here, not a huge deal. Okay. All right, now we've got some color casts. Now there's this weird thing. a lot of people think you need to remove all of the color cast. I don't think you need to remove color cast. It's always been a pet peeve of mine. I do think you need to reduce them because they are a bit exaggerated in the photo themselves. I mean, they're somewhat accurate, but from a distraction perspective, they are not entirely natural. So, you know, when we're there in person, we're not going to notice that these yellows on this cabinet are there, on these cabinets are there. So I also use Raya Pro to remove color cast. So the way you do that is you go into adjustments and you create a hue and saturation layer. Bring your saturation down to about 75% or minus 25% rather, minus 75. You're going to invert your hue and saturation layer to where it's black, a black mask basically. Come into Raya Pro, hit color, and you're just going to use the eyedropper tool to select the color of the cast that you want to remove. I want to remove this orangish color. We'll hit OK. And it's going to find that color everywhere. And of course, it's going to show it all over the place. And that's fine. We're just going to go ahead and select it for now. And we're just going to subtly start brushing some of these color casts. Now again, I think you do need some color cast in there, so I'm not going to remove it. We're going to keep it down to like 20%. But I'm just going to subtly brush out some of the color that was created in those areas. Just where I find it's a bit distracting. It's mostly on that, to be honest with you. Otherwise, the color casts don't really bother me here all that much. This was white, so we'll do that. I mean, that's fine with me. Now we're just going to go into, the other way you remove color cast is you go into adjustments, go back into hue and saturation, then you can just select the actual color that you want to remove the cast of. So we'll go to blues. And if I bring the saturation all the way up, it'll show you where all the blues are present in this scene. So you can simply just bring the saturation down to a point where it's not bothering you anymore. So right there, again, I don't remove them completely. I'm okay with a little bit being in there, but I brought it down about halfway. And generally speaking, I feel like this is done, but you know, I'm not going to know for sure that it's done until later on after I go through all of the photos and I come back and look at this and just evaluate and see what's bothering me. But for right now, it's done. Now, I will come back and do a finishing on all of the photos once I go through the entire set because I want there to be some consistency. So I'm not going to add any contrast or anything. I wouldn't normally add any contrast or anything right now. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to go ahead and add some contrast on here just so that you can kind of see what the finishing process might look like. But generally speaking, I will add my contrast and finishing after the fact. Now, I use two different tools to do my finishing. Let me make a flattened image right here. So I use two different tools normally to add my finishing touches on there. I'll use a preset that I made in Nik Collection, Color Effects Pro, and I also use Luminar. I've been leaning more towards Luminar over the last year, and I think the reason is because I just like their tools. They have a good preset that I made, and I'll walk you through that. So all you really do is you go to Filter, Skylum Software, Luminar AI, and it's going to bring this flattened layer that I just made into Luminar. And I'll show you my preset, but I'll also show you just kind of how I come up with some of these settings. All right, so I have a preset in here, Architectural Finishing. But generally speaking, the way I kind of did this was I came in and I went through and I just created some general, I just made some general adjustments in almost every one of these tools that are like color or contrast related. And I just made the adjustments that I liked and I've just kind of refined it over time. And yeah, you go through literally all of these details, color, structure, etc. And before you know it, you have a preset that you make. And again, it's very subtle. It's just a very subtle little contrast and structure boost. And we'll go ahead and hit apply. And this is what the final result is that it gives me. So this is the unedited. This is the finished with Luminar. Now let me go ahead and show you what Nik Color Effects does. So I'm going to filter. And same thing, I went through and I've created kind of my own preset over time. Just going through all the settings and just adjusting it to how I like it best. Now this preset gives me a little bit more of a moodier, shadowy kind of look. So it kind of just depends on the shoot that I'm doing. If I want it to have a little bit more, again, moodiness to it, I'll use the Color Efex Pro. If I just want it to be a clean architectural finish, then I'll just use my Luminar preset. So this is the Nik Color Efex Pro 4 layer. This is flat. This is before, after, before, after. So you can see it adds a lot of contrast. Now let me show you the Luminar layer versus the Nik. So this is the Nik. This is the Luminar. Nik, Luminar. As you can see, a lot more contrast, a little bit more moodier on the Nik one. So yeah, again, it's personal preference. If you want more of a moodier look, you know, I use, it just depends on what I want, what I'm feeling with this particular shoot. I kind of want this to be somewhere in the middle, like I'm okay with all of the contrast, but you know, I do like it a bit like subdued. It's still better than where it was, like this is with no contrast added. But yeah, I think I like somewhere in between. And maybe we can even just combine the two. So maybe what I could do is I could add a mask to this and just kind of brush in the areas that I like this to be a little more contrasty right here. This is all fine right here. Yeah, so that looks pretty good. Combination of the two. Just goofing around a little bit. So I think this is pretty much our finished image. Again, I left a lot of the color cast in because I think it looks good. You know, again, it's personal preference, and people are going to hire you for your personal preference, not doing what every single other person is doing. Is this a perfect image? No. I mean, I'm sure I could sit here and edit all day long and find other things. Like as I'm looking at it, I'm already seeing there is a pretty significant blue cast from right here compared to over here. So that's going to bother me. So one other thing I can do is I can add a new layer and go and switch this blend mode to color. And I want to find, if I want to sample, let me see, I'm going to hit my brush tool. I want things to look more like they do over here. So I'm just going to brush in that color over here so that it matches a little bit more. Instead of going through the removal of color cast, I'm just going to add that color over here so that it's part of it. Oops. So as you can see, it just it takes out that blue cast. Got a little bit more right here. Now it's starting to warm up a little bit down here, so we're going to have to bring this brush down to 20%, and I'm going to soften it up a little bit. All right, that's good enough for me. Nothing else is really bothering me enough. I know, like, for some people, these color casts will drive people absolutely crazy. And again, I'm going to come back and look at this again later. It may end up driving me crazy, and I may reduce it even more. But as of right now, I'm happy with where things are at. And that's it. So a lot of you may be looking at this like, wow, there's a lot of mistakes right now. You need to fix this thing. You need to fix that thing. And believe me, I know. It's just that I'm in the middle of this edit, and I'm fresh off of it, and I'm not seeing those things just yet. And some of you may be looking at this like, wow, that image is perfect. There's nothing else you need to do with it. This is all a matter of personal preference, and this is why it's kind of a pet peeve of mine when people get really discouraged over color cast because, you know, or distraction removal, because it's like it's in the eye of the beholder, right? What I would suggest everybody do, and I do this as well, is try not to deliver your photos to your client the same day you edit them, because I think you need to step away at the very minimum for, you know, 10, 20, 30 minutes, but it's best if you can do it at least a day or the next day or even a couple days later if you need to. And we can step away from the photo and revisit it with fresh eyes after you've looked at other things, things will start to stand out to you. But again, right after you're done editing, there's a lot of things that you're just not noticing. Like as I'm talking, I'm already starting, the color casts in this are starting to stand out to me even more. So I'll probably have to come back and dial those in a little bit so that they're not bothering me. But at some point you have to pull the trigger and just be done with it and say this is good enough. I would recommend, one of the things that helps with that is having a small peer group that you can share your images with before you deliver them to your clients, because it's kind of like it's having a little mastermind. I have one of them myself with about 8 other photographers across the country, and we do this as well. Before we deliver it to our clients, we share it with the peer group, ask them to pick it apart if there's anything that they notice that we didn't notice. It's nice having 5 or 6 other brains and eyeballs looking at it from their own perspective and sharing their insight with you. It only makes you better, and it helps you develop thicker skin. So hopefully you found this video helpful. If you want to see more videos like this, please let me know. Again, there's a million different ways to edit things, so I'm probably doing things a lot more complicated than needed. Maybe there's some shortcuts that I don't know about that you can share with me. I'm always open to learn. I love learning, so let me know if you have any suggestions for me to improve my editing. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you on the next video.